Hey, what's up, guys? And welcome back to the channel for another compilation of scary stories. Today, we have a ton of different spooky and truly unsettling accounts that I've curated just for you. Trust me, these stories are some of the most chilling ones I've ever found, so you're definitely going to want to stick around until the very end and listen to all of them. This is a perfect video to fall asleep to, or just have on in the background while you're studying or gaming. Before we dive in, if you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps the channel out a ton and keeps the nightmares coming. All right, anyways, let's get into tonight's scary stories. My husband, Caleb, and I moved our family to a remote home in the Tennessee woods about a year ago. We were looking for a fresh start, somewhere our kids could grow up away from the noise of the city. The house was exactly what we dreamed of, a sprawling ranch surrounded by thousands of acres of untouched forest. But I learned very quickly that the woods in Tennessee aren't just empty space. They're alive, and they listen. I remember the first night I realized something was wrong. Usually, the nights here are deafening. The crickets and cicadas create a wall of sound that vibrates through the windows. But one Tuesday, around 1 a.m., I realized I'd left my bag in the car. Caleb was already dead to the world, snoring softly, so I stepped out onto the porch alone. The second the screen door clicked shut, the world went dead silent. It was like a switch had been flipped. No bugs, no wind, just a heavy, suffocating quiet. My dog, Juno, who usually follows me everywhere, refused to step outside. She just stood at the door, her fur standing on end, let out a low, vibrating growl at the empty driveway. I walked down the steps, my heart pounding. Every step on the gravel sounded like a bone snapping in that silence. I felt eyes on me, not just from the trees, but from the darkness under the house. Just as I reached the car door, I heard it, a deep, wet, rhythmic panting. It sounded like a massive animal, but it was right behind my left ear. I spun around with my flashlight, but the beam hit nothing but empty air. No animal, no footprints. A month later, I was 8 months pregnant with our daughter. It was a rainy, stormy night, and Caleb and I were sitting on the porch listening to the thunder. Suddenly, I froze. Through the sound of the rain, I heard it. A small child crying for help deep in the trees. "Caleb, do you hear that?" I whispered. He looked at me confused. "Hear what?" "Just the storm, babe." But it was so clear to me. It sounded exactly like our 3-year-old son. I stood up, feeling a frantic biological urge to run into the dark. "He's out there! He got out of the house!" I screamed. Caleb grabbed my arm and pointed toward the window behind us. Through the glass, we could see our son, fast asleep on the sofa. I sat back down, shaking. The voice I'd heard wasn't just like him, it was a perfect playback of him. It had the same lisp, the same urgent pitch he uses when he's scared. The peeking started after that. I'd be in the kitchen and see a tall, dark figure between the trees across the road. It moved on all fours at first, but then it would stand up and walk like a man, but way too fast. It covered ground with a silent, gliding motion that made my stomach turn. One evening, I heard Caleb call my name from the back patio. "Hey, honey, can you come here for a second?" It was his voice, 100% certain. I walked toward the sliding door, but then I heard a thud from upstairs. I ran up and found Caleb in the bathroom, fixing a leaky faucet. He hadn't been on the patio. We eventually found an old, rusted sign at the edge of the property, hidden behind some briars. It said, "Screamer lives here." I know now that whatever is out there is learning us. It's recording our voices, our names, and our cries. It's waiting for the one moment I'm too tired to check the window and I follow my own husband's voice into the trees. This happened back in 2001, but the image of those headlights in my rearview mirror still haunts me every time I drive at night. I was 23, driving a heavy old station wagon from my mom's house in Colorado back to my apartment in Arizona. I've always been an anxious driver. My mother always told me that if a car follows you for more than a few miles, you don't go home, you go to a police station. But on this empty stretch of highway, there were no turns, just 45 miles of desert and absolute darkness. Around 2 a.m., a red pickup truck came up fast behind me. He started flashing his high beams, aggressive, blinding bursts of light. Then came the honking. Honk, 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 honk. It was frantic. I panicked, thinking maybe my back tire was shredded or my trunk was wide open. Against every instinct I had, I pulled over to the shoulder. The truck pulled in directly behind me, leaving his brights on. The glare was so intense I couldn't see the driver's face, just the silhouette of a man. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked toward the back of my wagon. I expected him to jump out and tell me my car was on fire. But he didn't get out. He just sat there, still honking. I reached the back of my car and saw that everything was fine. The tires were inflated, the hatch was locked. I looked at the truck again. The man was leaning against his steering wheel, his face illuminated by the green glow of his dashboard. He was wearing thick, wire-rimmed glasses, and he was smiling. It wasn't a helpful smile. It was a wide, jagged grin that didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't looking at my car. He was staring directly at my throat. The second he reached for his door handle, my brain finally screamed at me to move. I dove back into my driver's seat, locked the doors, and floored it. He didn't give up. He stayed glued to my bumper for the next 40 miles. Every time I sped up, he sped up. Every time I tried to see his license plate, he'd swerve into the other lane to stay in my blind spot. I was sobbing, my hands shaking so hard I could barely keep the car on the road. There was no cell service, no other cars, just me and the man in the red truck. I finally saw the lights of an exit for a small town. I didn't even slow down. I flew off the ramp and into a 24-hour grocery store parking lot. There was an ambulance parked near the entrance, and I pulled my wagon right alongside it. I sat there, gasping for air, waiting for him to leave. He pulled into the lot and parked 3 rows away. He sat there for a full hour, the engine idling, just watching me through the glass. He only drove away when a second ambulance and a police car arrived for a shift change. Years later, I was watching a crime show with my husband. A story popped up about a highway predator who worked that exact stretch of road in the early 2000s. He used a red truck and emergency tactics to get women to stop. They found 4 abandoned cars on that shoulder. The women were never found. If I hadn't jumped back in that car when I did, I would have been number 5. In the summer of '95, my best friend Sarah and I decided to pull a real-life Stand By Me. We grew up in a tiny town in Ohio where the only thing to do was hike. We had heard rumors about an old abandoned railroad track that cut through the densest part of the state forest, tracks that hadn't seen a train since the Great Depression. We packed some canned food, a couple of hammocks, and a map. We had my sister drop us off at an old crossing, and we started walking. The first day was beautiful. It was nostalgic and quiet. We found rusted-out bridges and rivers that felt like they belonged in a different century. But by the second day, the atmosphere shifted. We were miles from the nearest road when the woods began to feel heavy. The trees were taller here, their branches intertwining to block out the sun, making the tracks feel like a long, dark tunnel. Around dusk, we decided to scout the area before setting up our hammocks. We hiked up a small ridge overlooking a deep ravine. At the bottom, hidden under layers of black moss and rotting vines, was a building. At first, we thought it was an old barn, but as we got closer, we saw the cross on the roof. It was a church, a small, sagging structure made of wood that had turned pitch black from decades of decay. There was no glass in the windows, just dark, gaping holes like empty eye sockets. "Who builds a church 5 miles from the nearest house?" Sarah whispered. We crept down the hill. There were no paths, no footprints, no signs of life. We peeked through the doorway. Inside, the pews were still there, arranged in neat rows facing a rotted altar. It felt like the people had just walked out in the middle of a service and never came back. We headed back to our ridge to sleep, feeling a deep, instinctual unease. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound I will never forget. It was singing. It wasn't a choir. It was a low, discordant humming that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Sarah was already awake, her eyes wide with terror. We crawled to the edge of the ridge and looked down. The abandoned church was glowing. Dozens of candles were lit inside, their orange light flickering through the empty windows. A line of figures, maybe 20 of them, walked out of the church in single file. They were holding hands, their heads bowed. They weren't wearing robes. They were wearing old, tattered Sunday clothes that looked 80 years out of date. Then a man's voice boomed from inside the church. It was a chanting, rhythmic sound in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded like gravel being crushed in a meat grinder. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. Every single figure in that line stopped and turned their heads toward our ridge. They didn't move their bodies, just their necks, snapping into place with a sound we could hear from 100 yards away. They raised their torches, and then they started to climb. They didn't run like humans. They moved with a jerky, spider-like speed, their limbs moving at impossible angles. Sarah and I didn't even grab our bags. We bolted. We ran down those railroad tracks in the pitch black, tripping over the ties, our lungs screaming for air. We could hear them behind us, the sound of branches snapping and that low, rhythmic humming getting louder. We didn't stop until we hit the main road at dawn. We never went back for our gear. We never told our parents the truth. But sometimes, when I'm in a quiet place and the wind blows just right, I can still hear that grinding voice calling from the ravine. Some things in the woods aren't ghosts. They're just things that time forgot to kill. Those are the stories for tonight. If any of these chilled you to the bone, make sure to let me know which one was your favorite in the comments. I love reading your thoughts. And if you have a scary story of your own, whether it's a true encounter or something you can't explain, comment down below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps me keep these compilations going for you guys. Stay safe out there and try to get some sleep. Good night.